Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is Jacob. When my wife handed me divorce papers in front of her family, who always believed I wasn't good enough for her, they had no idea I'd prepared a surprise of my own. When she opened my gift, the smug laughter in the room turned to stunned silence. What they didn't know was that I'd made my move weeks before they made theirs, and I was ready for the fallout. I still remember the day I met Sarah long before she became my wife. It was one of those moments neither of us could have planned. She rolled in my bike repair shop in Portland on a rainy afternoon. Her chain snapped, and her frustration clear as day. She later admitted her go-to shop was booked solid, which was the only reason she ended up at my little place on the edge of town. Funny how life hinges on small twists like that. What started as a quick fix, grease on my hands, her pacing by the counter, turned into something much bigger. After I got her bike rolling again, we swapped numbers. Nothing serious, just a friendly exchange in case she needed another repair. But over the next few months, texts turned into late-night calls, then coffee dates in cozy cafes tucked between Portland's gray streets. Sarah was a rising star at a marketing agency, sharp and ambitious. I was just a guy running a small bike shop, keeping things simple but steady. Somehow, I charmed her. I still don't know exactly how, but she got hooked and we started dating. Those early days were effortless. Long rides along the river, her laughing at my bad puns, us figuring out life one moment at a time. It felt like we were building something real. But things started to shift when marriage entered the picture. That's when I noticed not everyone was cheering for us. Sarah's family, based up in Seattle, never fully accepted me. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself, she loves me. Their opinions don't matter. But I was naive. Sarah was woven tightly into her family's world. Weekly dinners, group chats that never stopped, holidays that felt like mandatory summits. I underestimated how deep those ties ran. Even with the warning signs glaring at me, her mother's pointed comments about my simple job, her father's cold handshakes, I pushed forward with the marriage. I believed Sarah's love would be enough to drown out their disapproval. So we tied the knot in a small ceremony, moved into a modest house with a view of the city's skyline, and started our life together. The early years were good, even great. We found a rhythm that worked. Mornings sipping coffee on the porch, evenings cooking together or binge-watching shows. Sarah's laugh could still light up a room, and I felt like the luckiest guy alive. The only tension came when we visited her family. I didn't expect to be treated like royalty, but I hoped for basic respect as her husband. Instead, every trip to Seattle felt like walking into a lion's den. Her mother, Diane, had a way of cutting me down without saying much. A raised eyebrow, a comment about Sarah's potential that implied I was holding her back. Her father, Richard, was quieter, but his silence was just as heavy. He'd sit there, sipping his coffee, barely acknowledging me. It was clear they saw me as the bike shop guy, not the man they'd envisioned for their daughter. They never said it outright, but the message was loud. I wasn't good enough. Every visit felt like a test I couldn't pass, measured against some invisible standard I didn't even understand. When I brought it up to Sarah, she'd brush it off. They're just protective, she'd say. You don't have to win them over. We don't live with them. We just visit. I tried to take her advice, pasting on a smile during those tense dinners, nodding along to their stories about Sarah's high-flying colleagues. I figured I could handle it for her sake. It worked for a while, but I was ignoring something critical. Sarah wasn't just close to her family. She was shaped by them in ways I hadn't fully grasped. Their opinions weren't just background noise. They were a current pulling her in directions I couldn't see. As Sarah's career skyrocketed, the cracks in our marriage started to show. She was climbing the ranks at her agency, landing promotions that came with bigger offices and fatter paychecks. I was genuinely proud of her. I saw how hard she worked. Late nights, early mornings, her mind always racing with ideas. When she got her first big promotion, I surprised her with a homemade dinner and her favorite bottle of Pinot Noir. It felt like a win for both of us, a shared victory. But over time, her success started to feel less like ours and more like hers. Her new roles brought more responsibility. Endless meetings, emails that pinged at all hours, deadlines that ate up our weekends. I kept my shop running, Same as always. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. The money covered our bills, the mortgage, and small treats like weekend getaways. I never felt inferior because she earned more. We were a team, or so I thought. Then the distance crept in. Sarah started canceling plans, blaming urgent projects. I'd cook dinner, only to eat alone at the kitchen table, her plate untouched. Our nightly ritual of talking about our days, her stories from the office, my tales from the shop, faded. She'd scroll through work emails while I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'd ask, "Everything okay?" And she'd mumble about a campaign or how drained she was. I believed her at first, thinking it was just a busy season. I'd remind myself that marriage has its ebbs and flows, that we'd find our way back to each other. But she didn't. She poured herself into her job, leaving less and less for us. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home, wondering if she even noticed I was there. Deep down, I still loved her, but I was starting to see the truth. The woman I married was slipping away, and I wasn't sure how to bring her back. The distance between Sarah and me grew wider, like a crack in the pavement that starts small but splits everything apart. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that her career demands would ease up and we'd find our way back to the couple we used to be. But months turned into a year, and the gap only deepened. I'd come home from a shop, hands still smelling of grease, and find her glued to her laptop, her face lit by the screen's glow. Our conversations, once full of laughter and plans, became clipped exchanges about bills or what to order for takeout. I'd ask about her day, hoping to spark something, but she'd give me one-word answers or sigh. "It's just work, Jacob." I started to feel like I was living with a roommate, not a wife. We'd always talked about starting a family. Before her promotions, it was a shared dream. Late-night talks about baby names, imagining a kid with her eyes and my stubborn streak. So when Sarah mentioned she was feeling off, tired and nauseous, my heart leapt. Could this be it? We booked a doctor's appointment, both of us nervous but hopeful, stealing glances at each other in the waiting room. The test came back negative. I was disappointed, but what hit harder was the doctor's follow-up. She sat us down, her voice calm but firm, and asked about Sarah's routine. When Sarah described her schedule, back-to-back meetings, late-night reports, emails at 2 a.m., the doctor didn't sugarcoat it. That level of stress, she said, can make it nearly impossible for your body to conceive. You need rest, balance, less pressure. It was a gut punch, but made sense. I waited for Sarah to say something on the drive home, maybe acknowledge we needed to make changes. But she just stared out the window, then pulled out her phone and started typing. No discussion, no reflection, just back to work. Days passed, then weeks, and she never brought up the doctor's advice. I kept hoping she'd slow down, maybe cut back on the late nights, so we could focus on the family we both said we wanted. But nothing changed. Her phone was her constant companion, buzzing with notifications that pulled her away from me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. One quiet evening, after another dinner where she barely looked up from her screen, I asked her point blank, "Are you going to make any changes at work? For us, for the family we talked about." I kept my tone steady, but she snapped like I'd accused her of something. "You're trying to hold me back," she said, her voice sharp. "Just because I'm doing well, you can't handle it. My parents warned me about this. You're not on my level." The words cut deep. Her parents? Suddenly, their disapproval wasn't just background noise. It was in her voice, loud and clear. I sat there, stunned, as she stormed off. What started as a plea for us to work together turned into an attack on who I was. That night, I realized this wasn't just about a busy job or a rough patch. Something fundamental had shifted. After that fight, Sarah changed in ways I couldn't ignore. She became obsessed with appearances, how she dressed, who she was seen with, what people thought of her. She'd spend hours picking out outfits for casual drinks with coworkers, even on days off. I'd always admired how she carried herself, but this was different, like she was performing for an audience I wasn't part of. She started spending more time with her work friends, especially one guy, Michael, who kept popping up in her stories. "Just networking," she'd say when she came home late, smelling faintly of wine. I'd be at home, fixing dinner or tinkering with a bike in the garage, wondering when my wife had become a stranger. Our intimacy faded to nothing. No more late-night talks, no more stolen kisses. We were two people sharing a house, not a life. The comparison started creeping in, subtle at first, but impossible to miss. Michael just closed a huge deal, she'd say over dinner, her tone implying I should be doing more. Maybe you should think about expanding the shop. Other guys are scaling up. It wasn't advice. It was a jab, a reminder that I didn't measure up to the polished suits she now surrounded herself with. I bite my tongue, but each comment chipped away at me. I started questioning everything. My business, my worth, our marriage. I'd lie awake at night, asking myself if I should walk away. What would people say if I did? Would her family smirk and say they'd been right all along? So I stayed, clinging to the hope that we could fix this, even as the evidence piled up that Sarah had already checked out. One night, everything cracked open. Sarah came home late again, claiming she was swamped at work. She changed into sweats, climbed into bed, and started texting, her phone glowing in the dark. I was in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, but something pulled me back to the bedroom. She'd fallen asleep, her phone still in her hand, the screen still on. I don't know what made me pick it up, call it instinct or desperation, but I did. I scrolled through her messages with Michael, the work friend she always mentioned. My stomach dropped. They weren't just chatting about campaigns or clients. The texts were intimate, personal, late-night confessions. He was telling her to leave me, saying she deserved better, that she was wasting her potential. And Sarah? She agreed. I'm working on it, she wrote. I'll file soon. My hand shook as I read those words. She'd already decided our marriage was over, and I was just an obstacle. I didn't wake her. Instead, I took screenshots, every damning word, and emailed them to myself. Sitting there in the dark, her phone still in my hand, I felt the last thread of hope snap. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to play the fool. From that moment, I stopped trying to save our marriage and started planning my exit. But I knew I had to be smart. Feelings wouldn't hold up in court. Facts would. I started documenting everything. Her late nights, her coldness, the way she'd dismiss me. I wasn't out for revenge. I was protecting myself from the storm I knew was coming. Sarah thought she had the upper hand, but I was about to change the game. The screenshots from Sarah's phone were a cold slap of reality, but they weren't enough. I needed more than hurt feelings and a few incriminating texts to protect myself. If this was heading to divorce, and it was clear now that it was, I had to be ready. I started keeping a record of everything. Every time Sarah came home late without explanation, every dismissive comment, every moment she chose her work or her friends over our marriage. I jotted it down in a small notebook I kept at my desk at the shop, hidden behind spare parts and invoices. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but I couldn't afford to be blindsided. Her family's influence, her growing distance, and now the proof of her affair with Michael. It all told me she was already planning her exit. I had to stay one step ahead. One evening, I tried to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of our marriage. I suggested seeing a marriage counselor, hoping maybe a neutral third party could help us find a way back. I chose my words carefully, keeping my tone calm, but Sarah shut it down hard. Counseling? She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. You think that's going to fix this? You're the problem, Jacob. You're stuck in your little shop, while I'm out there building something real. Her words were venomous, each one a deliberate cut. She didn't just reject the idea. She made it clear she had no interest in saving us. I stood there, absorbing the blow, but I didn't argue back. Instead, I quietly recorded the conversation on my phone, tucked in my pocket. It felt extreme, but I was done being caught off guard. That recording, her voice spitting those cruel words, was another piece of evidence in my growing arsenal. I knew I needed more than texts and an audio clip to prove what was happening. I needed undeniable proof of her affair, something that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding. For weeks, I tried to track her myself. On nights, she claimed to be working late. I'd check her location through a shared app we'd set up years ago for convenience. I'd drive by her office or the bars and restaurants she mentioned, hoping to catch a glimpse of her with Michael. But she was careful, or lucky. I kept coming up empty, and it was eating at me. I wasn't a detective, and tailing her was starting to feel like a losing game. That's when I decided to hire a professional. I I found a private investigator through a discreet ad online, a guy named Tom who didn't ask too many questions. I gave him everything I had: Sarah's schedule, Michael's name, the places she frequented. Within days, he started delivering. Less than a week later, Tom met me in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of Portland. He slid a folder across the table, his face neutral. Inside were photos and video stills, Sarah and Michael, together unmistakable. They weren't sneaking around in dark alleys. They were out in the open, laughing at a rooftop bar, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him like she used to do with me. There was even a clip of them slipping into a hotel, her hand in his. My chest tightened as I flipped through the evidence, but I didn't break down. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about strategy. Tom's work was thorough, and with those images, the screenshots, and the audio of Sarah's outburst, I had what I needed. I thanked him, paid the invoice, and drove home in silence, the folder burning a hole in the passenger seat. With the evidence in hand, I contacted a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Karen who specialized in messy divorces. She didn't sugarcoat things. "You've got a strong case," she said, flipping through the folder. "Infidelity, emotional neglect, and her income far exceeding yours. This could mean a favorable settlement." I wasn't chasing money, but I wanted to walk away with my dignity intact. Karen drafted the divorce papers, and I had them ready to go, but I didn't serve them right away. An idea was forming, one that felt both risky and right. Sarah's family had always made me feel small, especially during their big Christmas gatherings in Seattle. This year, I'd show up with more than a fake smile. I'd deliver a moment they'd never forget. The weeks leading up to Christmas were tense. Sarah and I were barely speaking, moving around each other like strangers in our own home. She'd come home late, toss her bag on the counter, and head straight to bed, her phone always close. I kept up the act, playing the part of the clueless husband, but inside, I was counting down the days. I started preparing my gift for her, a small black box, sleek and unassuming, that would hold my divorce papers, the printed photos, the screenshots, and a USB drive with Tom's videos. I didn't want to just hand her the papers. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices in front of the family that had always backed her up. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my respect. As Christmas approached, I felt a strange calm. The love was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. Sarah thought she was in control, that she could blindside me with her own divorce papers and walk away clean. Her family thought they'd finally be rid of the bike shop guy who never fit their mold. But I was ready to flip the script. I could already picture the scene. The smug grins fading, the room going silent, Sarah's face when she realized I wasn't the one left scrambling. For the first time in months, I felt like I was holding the cards, and I was ready to play them. Christmas Eve arrived, and the drive to Sarah's parents' house in Seattle felt like a march to battle. The car was quiet, the air between us thick with unspoken resentment. Sarah scrolled through her phone, oblivious to the storm I was carrying in the small black box tucked in my jacket. Her family's annual Christmas gathering was a tradition, a showcase of their polished life. Perfectly decorated tree, catered food, everyone dressed like they were posing for a magazine. Every year, I played along, swallowing their subtle jabs and forced smiles. But this time, I wasn't there to play nice. I was there to end the charade. We pulled up to the house, a sprawling modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. Sarah's mother, Diane, greeted us at the door with her usual tight-lipped smile, her eyes skimming over me like I was an afterthought. Her father, Richard, gave me a nod, his handshake as cold as ever. Inside, the living room buzzed with relatives and their high-achieving friends, lawyers, tech execs, the kind of crowd that made my bike shop feel like a lemonade stand. Sarah slipped into the mix effortlessly, laughing at their stories, her charm on full display. I hung back, nursing a glass of wine, watching the clock. I didn't engage much, and for once, no one seemed to care. They'd written me off long ago, and tonight that suited me just fine. Christmas morning came, and the room was a flurry of wrapping paper and forced cheer. Gifts were exchanged with exaggerated enthusiasm, designer scarves, fancy tech gadgets, bottles of wine with names I couldn't pronounce. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands in my lap, waiting. Then Sarah approached, her smile confident, almost smug, as she handed me a slim, neatly wrapped envelope. The room quieted, eyes turning to us. Her family's faces held a mix of amusement and anticipation, like they knew what was coming and couldn't wait to see me squirm. I took the envelope, my fingers steady, and opened it slowly. Inside were divorce papers filed just days earlier. Laughter rippled through the room. Diane's sharp chuckle, her sister's stifled giggle. They thought this was my breaking point, the moment I'd finally crumble under their judgment. I didn't flinch. I looked up at Sarah, her eyes gleaming with certainty, and said, "Funny, I got you something too." I reached behind the chair and pulled out the small black box I'd been carrying. Her confidence faltered just for a second as she took it. The room was still, the air heavy with curiosity. She unwrapped it carefully, her fingers hesitating as she lifted the lid. Inside were my own divorce papers, signed and dated weeks ago. Tucked beside them were printed photos of her and Michael, his arm around her at the bar, their hands linked outside the hotel. There were screenshots of their texts, his words urging her to leave me, her replies agreeing to end it soon. And at the bottom, a USB drive. I leaned in, my voice low but clear. "You might want to watch the videos on there in private. They show more than the photos." The room went dead silent. Sarah's face drained of color, her hands frozen on the box. Diane's smile vanished. Richard's coffee cup paused midair. The relatives exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier laughter replaced by a tense hush. Sarah's eyes darted to mine, searching for a way out, but there was none. I stood up, my voice steady as I addressed the room. "I may not have been what you wanted for her," I said, looking from Diane to Richard to the sea of stunned faces. "But I was loyal. Sarah humiliated me in ways you'll never understand. We both got what we came for." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "I'll see you in court." Then I turned and walked out, the front door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back, but I could imagine the chaos I'd left behind. Sarah scrambling to explain, her family grappling with the reality that their golden daughter wasn't so perfect after all. Driving back to Portland, the city lights blurring through the rain, I felt a strange mix of relief and ache. I'd spent years trying to fit into their world, to prove I was enough. Now I was done. The box wasn't just a counter move. It was my declaration that I wouldn't be their punching bag anymore. But as the miles stretched on, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Divorce wasn't just a moment. It was a process, and Sarah wouldn't go down without a fight. I gripped the steering wheel, my evidence folder. The drive back to Portland was a blur, the rain streaking across my windshield mirroring the storm still raging inside me. I'd walked out of Sarah's parents' house with my head high, but the weight of what had just happened clung to me. I'd flipped the script, turned their smug victory into a moment of reckoning, but it didn't feel like a win. Not yet. The divorce papers, the photos, the USB drive, they were my armor, not my triumph. As I pulled into our driveway, the house dark and empty, the reality hit. This was the end of the life I'd built with Sarah. The love we'd once had, the dreams of a family, the quiet nights laughing over takeout. It was all gone. But I wasn't going to let her or her family rewrite the story to make me the villain. The divorce process was a grind. Sarah didn't go quietly. She hired a high-powered lawyer, probably paid for by her parents, and they came out swinging. In court, she tried to paint me as the problem, emotionally distant, unsupportive, a man who couldn't keep up with her ambition. Her lawyer spun a tale of me holding her back, of my limited career dragging down her potential. It was the same narrative her family had always pushed, now dressed up in legal jargon. But I was ready. My lawyer, Karen, was a bulldog. She presented the evidence with surgical precision. The screenshots of Sarah's texts with Michael, the photos and videos from the private investigator, the audio of her vicious rejection of counseling. Each piece landed like a hammer, dismantling Sarah's story. The judge didn't buy her deflections. The affair was undeniable, and so was the emotional neglect she'd subjected me to. The financial side was where things got messy. Sarah earned significantly more than I did, and in Oregon that mattered. Karen had warned me early on that I could push for a settlement, given the circumstances. I didn't want to bleed her dry. Despite everything, I wasn't out for revenge, but I wasn't going to walk away with nothing either. The judge ruled in my favor. Our assets were split evenly. But because of her higher income and the evidence of her infidelity, Sarah was ordered to pay me a substantial settlement. The shop, my pride and joy, stayed mine, untouched. When the gavel came down, Sarah's face was a mask of fury. She'd walked into court thinking she could control the outcome, just like she controlled our marriage's slow death. But facts don't bend to charm or family money. After the ruling, Sarah didn't let go quietly. My phone lit up with voicemails and texts for weeks, angry rants, tearful accusations, attempts to guilt me into feeling like the bad guy. "You ruined everything," one message read. "You could have just let it go." Another called me petty, said I'd humiliated her for no reason. I didn't respond. Every word she sent was just noise, a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Eventually, I blocked her number, her family's too. I didn't need their voices in my head anymore. The chapter was closed, and I was ready to move on, even if the scars were still fresh. In the quiet months that followed, I had time to sit with what had happened. Losing a marriage isn't something you just shrug off, no matter how justified the end might be. There were nights when I'd sit in the shop after hours, surrounded by tools and half-fixed bikes, replaying the years with Sarah. The good moments, the way she'd tease me about my terrible taste in music, or how we'd dance in the kitchen to no song at all, still stung. I grieved what we could have been, what I'd hoped we'd build together. But I also felt a growing sense of peace. I hadn't let her or her family drag me through the mud. They'd expected me to crumble, to slink away as the failure they always saw me as. Instead, I'd stood my ground. I'd matched their energy with proof, with preparation, with resolve. The shop became my refuge. I poured myself into it, fixing bikes, chatting with customers, even starting a small repair workshop for local kids who wanted to learn the trade. It wasn't a corner office or a six-figure salary, but it was mine, and it was honest. I started riding again, long loops through the forests outside Portland, the wind clear in my head. I wasn't the guy Sarah or her family had tried to define me as. I was Jacob, loyal, steady, and stronger than they'd ever given me credit for. As the months passed, the ache dulled, replaced by a quiet confidence. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. And somewhere, deep down, I hoped Sarah was learning that actions have consequences, even for someone who thought they could outrun them.